What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the E4 Explicit Podcast. I'm Corey, and today you're going to see me interview Dave Reichert. He was a King County sheriff at one point, but before that, he was a homicide detective back in the day when your boy Gary Ridgway, aka the Green River Killer, was doing his thing mainly from 82 to 84 when he did his most killings. That King County area also had the glorious Ted Bundy to deal with as well. So there's that. Dave actually was a detective on that case, among a couple other ones, and then he was the head lead detective on the task force. This case, if you know anything about it, was notorious. It lasted forever. They didn't even catch him until it was like early 2000s, late 90s. I mean, it went on for decades. But anyway, we talk about in great detail how that disrupted the community, the impact it had on the officers, and everything that was happening during that crazy time. Don't forget to like this video, hit that bell notification so you get notified every single time I pop up on your screen. Also, subscribe to the channel. Help me out. I'm trying to get them subs up. Let's do this together. I really appreciate it. Share this video too. I mean, you can check me out on all the links on all my social media links in the description as well. And audio. Check me out on the audio platforms, iTunes, Spotify, all that stuff. We're over there. But if you like these interviews, let me know in the comments. I'm having a lot of fun interviewing these fantastic people. They're so interesting. I know I've been on like a Tiger King or like a murder type kick as of late. So let me know if you're liking these videos. And if you're not, let me know. I appreciate it. I love constructive criticism. But anyway, enjoy this video of the E4 Explicit Podcast with former homicide detective and King County Sheriff Dave Reichert. Peace out. This episode of the E4 Explicit Podcast is brought to you by Bravo Concealment. Bravo Concealment is known for some of the best high quality and concealable holsters on the market. Located in the great state of Texas, they offer free shipping and unlimited lifetime warranty on all of their products, and a 30-day money-back guarantee if you don't like the product. I've been using Bravo Concealment for my gun holsters ever since I got into guns, and the quality is by far, bar none, the top notch in the entire industry that I've seen. And right now they're doing a buy one, get one free, plus free shipping, the 30-day money-back guarantee, and a lifetime warranty. On top of that, you, my friends, will get 10% off of any product, of any purchase on their website by using Explicit 10. Use the code Explicit10 and you'll get 10% off your entire purchase from BravoConcealment.com. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the E4 Explicit Podcast. I'm Corey, and today I have Dave Reichert, who was a homicide detective back in the day with King County Sheriff in Washington State, and then eventually became the sheriff of King County and dealt with some notable characters, is what I'll say. But we're going to talk about some of those things today. And Dave, thanks so much for coming on. And if you can give a little synopsis of who you are, that would be great.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hey, thanks for having me. I've done a number of these, and I feel this need, this obligation um, to communicate to the people across the country through these podcasts now. These new platforms that are out there for people to listen to. So if I sort of feel like the more I do these, the more I'm able to help people understand what it's like to be a cop, what it was like to work as the lead investigator in the Green River serial murder case that took 19 years to solve, and maybe a little flavor was what it was like to be a member of the United States Congress for 14 years. So I grew up in East Renton. I'm the oldest of 7 children. We grew up in a pretty uh, poor family, struggling family. Ran away from home when I was a senior in high school because of domestic violence. Sort of the protector of my little brothers and sisters as we were growing up. Was raised in a neighborhood where fighting, was physically fighting was sort of the norm, and so I had to learn that was not the way to solve problems. But eventually, I think the way I grew up and what I saw at home. Um, and my protective nature of my brothers and sisters and other vulnerable kids in the neighborhood sort of led me to go into law enforcement. I played sports when I was in all the way from 8 years old. Played basketball, tackle football, and baseball. I played 2 years of junior college basketball, football, and got married uh, after 2 years of college. A few months later, joined the Air Force and came back from active duty and joined the sheriff's office in 1972 and worked as a patrol cop. Uh, had some of the normal activities that you experience on patrol, but also some unusual calls where I went to a domestic violence call, was stabbed, had my throat cut with a butcher knife. Um, and I've got a lot of patrol stories, but went off of patrol into property crimes detectives. From there, I was asked to come and work in the homicide unit in early 1979. And so I worked homicide and robbery until I was assigned as the lead investigator in um, August of 1982 as the lead investigator of the Green River case in August of 1982. Worked Green River until they closed it down in early 1990, promoted to sergeant, went back to patrol, promoted to lieutenant as the SWAT commander, did that for a while, promoted to captain, went to precinct commander from there. And then from precinct commander, I was appointed as the sheriff. Wow. And then ran for election in 1997, was the first elected sheriff in King County in 30 years. After I became the sheriff, I reopened the Green River case. We can talk about that later. Spent 8 years in King County as the sheriff, went through WTO, was on the streets of Seattle during the World Trade Organization riots in Seattle. And then after that, I ran for Congress and spent 14 years in Congress representing the district in Washington State, traveled all over the world, including the Middle East, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, etc., Israel, Jordan, and other parts of the world. And then retired from there and went to work in Central America, working to help stop human trafficking. Left that job about 3 or 4 months ago, and now I'm back to work helping local law enforcement across the country acquire a new technology called rapid DNA, which is a machine that can identify can identify a DNA profile within 90 minutes. And so that's kind of I've got 3 children, 6 grandchildren, and 3 great grandchildren. Been married almost 51 years.
Damn.
And I'm a workout nut. I love every morning I'm up pumping iron or running or doing something.
Yeah, man, you look pretty swollen in pictures, man. I'm not gonna lie. You're pretty. What are you, like 25 now?
Yeah, right. 71.
You know, it's funny, when I first saw you, I was like, I don't know if you've ever gotten this before, but if there was a movie about your life for the Green River Killer, who do you think would play you?
I don't know, but I've been told I look like Leslie Nielsen. So
Really?
yeah,
She's
dead.
Yeah, all right. Leslie, I think Steve Carell. The older photos of you, especially the one from the book, the one that I use for the thumbnail. Funny. Man, just good-looking guy, like hair. I don't know. I feel like he would kill it, and he's a great actor. But anyway, I always think of that.
I don't know if he's tough enough.
I was gonna say he's got some range, but yeah, I don't know if he's tough enough. Yeah,
Mel Gibson.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good one. Oh man, that's awesome, man. What a life. Well, that's funny. It's kind of, you're talking about a DNA in 90 minutes. I mean, wouldn't that have been nice back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s?
It absolutely would have been if we had DNA, just DNA.
Yeah,
we could have solved that case because we recovered evidence from the first few victims in the Green River in August. Bodily fluid from 2 of the victims in the river, and then in 1987 we were able to get a swab from Gary Ridgway. So we would have been able to save a lot of lives if we had DNA back then. Of course, we didn't we couldn't test. DNA wasn't a science back then, and eventually it did. Science caught up with the evidence, and in 2001 we were able to make those comparisons and arrest Ridgway.
Right. Yeah, that's um that's fascinating to me. That whole just the whole concept of law enforcement from that era, because if you think about it, 72 is a prolific year, because especially specifically in King County. I mean, you had Ted Bundy as well, and I don't know if you've seen it, but where I saw you, and I've known about you, but where I really saw you was in that Netflix doc that just came out, the Catching Killers, when they interview you and a couple of your colleagues about the Green River. But I've just saw a new documentary on A&E, and it literally, I didn't even know this. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, Gary Ridgway, the Green River, and BTK were all at one point active in their murders. I never knew that, and it's a fascinating documentary because it shows all of them, and they go back and forth. And right now they're in episode 3 talking about Ridgway. And I mean, I know one big part of something I want to talk to you about is, like, what it was like back then, the toll on the community, the toll is on law enforcement, because now everybody that's fascinated with these cases, all they ever hear or talk about is the killing. Oh, wow. He got convicted of 49 and he confessed to 71. Ridgway did. It's like, okay, you guys can Google that. Like, I don't want to really, I mean, we can talk about that a little bit, but I'm really curious and fascinated of, like, what it took the toll on you guys. I mean, you did such a fantastic way of telling it in that documentary. I know you didn't get a whole lot of time. Obviously, it's an hour-long series, but man, the Ted Bundy into Ridgeway. Obviously, that was, like, kind of a little bit later on, but the history of King County in general. I mean, have two of the most prolific serial killers in the history of the United States. I can't even imagine, like, what that has done to a community, law enforcement, and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. With Bundy, I was on patrol at the time, and my job back then was just to pass out the flyers of the suspect description and, of course, the description of the Volkswagen. So I was going from business to business with these flyers. Bob Keppel was the lead investigator. He was in Homicide unit. When I went to Homicide in 1979, Bob Keppel was there, and he and I became good friends and partners, and eventually worked some very serious cases together as partners in that unit. But later, during Green River, Bob Keppel and I actually flew to Florida and interviewed Ted Bundy for about 2.5 days, because he had written us a letter and said, "Hey, I'm interested in talking to you and helping you understand the mind of a serial killer. Don't ask me how I can understand or why I understand the mind of a serial killer, but if you're interested, I'd be happy to talk to you." So Bob Keppel and I flew to Stark Prison in Florida and spent some time with Ted Bundy, just talking about what he thought our riverman, as he called him, how he would act and what he would do, and some of the things that might alert us to him as a possible, this guy as a possible suspect. So, but the entire time during that conversation, Bob and I both knew that Bundy was really talking about himself. The Green River Man will do this, the River Man will do that, the River Man will do this, and in actuality, it was, Ted Bundy actually did this, and Ted Bundy actually did that. His part of my job in early 1982 was to look at cases earlier, because we felt that Ridgeway started before July of 1982, and so I had to kind of look at, when I started to go backwards in time, I butted up against the murders that Ted Bundy had committed, and so we were trying to figure out, okay, did Bundy, because there were some unsolved, obviously, that Bundy committed, and some unsolved that Ridgeway committed, and then you've got a group of murders in there that someone else committed that were never solved. So it was very complicated. It was part of my job. We just had a tremendous team when we finally realized in 1982, that we had a serial killer. It happened quick. My first prostitute murder investigation was in January of '82. Had no idea what was to come, obviously. We had a suspect in mind, didn't have enough to charge him. And then in July of 1982, Wendy Caulfield was found in the city of Kent jurisdiction in the river. So they were investigating a prostitute murder. And, and so I called Kent, and Kent detective and I were working together, trying to see if there were connections between the two. So
Hmm.
Leanne Wilcox was my case, Wendy Caulfield was Kent's case. We discovered they were cousins. And so we thought, okay, well, maybe there's a connection here. But then all of a sudden, on August 12th, Debbie Bonner was found, and I got a call on August 15th that two more bodies were found by a rafter going down the Green River. And then I found a third body on the riverbank as I was processing the scene where the two Opal Mills and Cynthia Hines were, Chapman and Hines were found in the river. And then I found Opal Mills on the riverbank processing that scene on August 15th. On that day, of course, obviously August 15th, finding three bodies, finding one body on August 12th, and then going back to July 15th on Wendy Caulfield, we were absolutely sure we had a serial killer, and we started a task force immediately on Sunday night. And then, of course, on Monday, we all met and began to plan how we were going to investigate this series.
Wow. Did you said you had a suspect in mind? Was it Ridgeway?
No, at the time, Ridgeway was not a suspect in early 1982, but we developed lots of suspects. We had
Mhm.
40,000 tip sheets, 40,000 tip sheets. We had 10,000
God.
items of evidence, and I couldn't tell you how many people we interviewed. But there's just um, 3 and 4 inch binders full of information that takes up an entire room at the King County Sheriff's Office. Of course, now all that's been uh, entered into, had to be manually typed into a computer. Your listeners should remember that in 1982 we had no computers, so
Mhm.
everything was on hard copy. We used Rolodex files. So those are little files that you can turn little knobs on the sides, to be descriptive for those who don't know what a Rolodex file was back in the day. Had 3x5 note cards that you could slip in and out of that file, and we kept track of all the names of the girls who were working, of the pimps who were putting them out there, of the Johns. We had a list of people who owned pickup trucks because that was our main suspect vehicle. We got a registration. We got registrations on every truck that was owned in the state of Washington. We had a list of people who had fishing licenses because of the Green River, obviously. We made a list of people who had been arrested for patronizing prostitutes, who had been arrested for assaulting women, not just the girls on the street. But you can see we were very thorough in creating a list, and then looking at this list and trying to determine how many people appeared more than once, and how many
Right.
lists did they appear. And if they appeared on 4 out of 5 lists or 3 out of 5 lists, they were priority A suspects. If they were lower, it'd be a B, and then finally a C. And then we focused on those A priority suspects first. And Ridgway became a suspect in '87.
Wow. That's so smart. That's such a forward thinking way to do that, I think, because that's another thing that's kind of interesting to me is you mentioned the binders and the 40,000 tips. How does one, I know you had a team, but how do you do all that scope of work? It's insane to me that's how
Well,
you guys had to do it, you know?
yeah, no, it didn't seem overwhelming at the time,
Mm,
because I think that the what was really weighing heavily on us was that each day that went by, there could be someone else killed.
right.
And so, and it wasn't we didn't show up and go to work for 8 hours and go home. This was like 24/7.
Right.
And I'd be out on the street, and then working in the office, and then out interviewing people, and then collecting bodies. And then some weeks we collect 5, 6 bodies just in one week. And imagine processing 5, 6 outdoor crime scenes of bodies that were, that were little girls who belonged to a family. And when you found those bodies, your goal was to find every microscopic piece of possible evidence that you could find on hands and knees with magnifying glasses and grass cutters and shears and chainsaws and tweezers and then go to the family's house and say, we've identified the remains that we found, and they are they belong to your daughter, and she's dead. And that was another part of my job, along with a couple of other detectives. Some of us were good at, feeling the emotion and the empathy and the tragedy. Some couldn't take the emotion that was directed at them, and didn't want any part of that. I felt obligated to do it. Sometimes they were angry, and rightly so. Uh, and would beat on my chest and cry, and some would hug and pass out and fall. I mean, just a range of emotions. Imagine losing your 16-year-old, 15, 14-year-old daughter. Um, and Yeah, you became very close with the families. I was a pallbearer at one of the funerals, been to several of the funerals, um, friends of some of the family members. So yeah, and you take that home with you. You live with it. I live with it today. Every detective that worked that case, that went to those body sites, you cannot close your eyes at night and not see. I collected over 100, well over 100 remains of little girls, and yeah, you don't forget the smell, you don't forget the sight, um, or the scene. You don't forget the pictures of the little girls before they were murdered, and you don't forget um, the emotion that the family showed. Uh, they love their child. There's still families today that keep the bedroom exactly the same way as it was when she was killed.
Wow. And I can only imagine that drove you to, why you were so meticulous, why you were so, forward thinking and so determined to find what happened to these young girls, right?
Yeah, I mean the whole team. There were some that came and stayed for 5 months, 6 months, and said, this is not going to be solved right away, and I have another career, and I don't think we're going to be solving it. Some said, and they left, but the majority of people who came there um, were, I mean, absolutely committed,
Mhm.
dedicated. I believed all the time, 100%, we will solve this case. Whenever the media asked me that question, and you can go to YouTube and you can look, search my name, and you'll find 20 or 30 documentaries. And every media interview I said, we are going to catch this guy, period.
Yep.
And I didn't know it was going to take so long, but we just had a great team of people, including the scientists. We had 2,500 volunteers that would come out and search the scenes with us, search and rescue people, search and rescue dogs, cadaver dogs, trackers from the Border Patrol, the FBI. We used a plane that was not supposed to be known to the public. The Secret Service didn't officially told us it didn't exist. But somehow we came up with some photographs back then of aerial shots of our crime scenes
Wow.
from space.
Right.
Which didn't help us at all. But it's just an example of the tools that we were really thinking outside the box as to how we could collect the evidence, what we could do to solve this case. We collected hairs and fibers from birds' nests that were nearby the body sites where they decomposed. I followed small animal trails, burrowing animals into from under the body, and in one case found a petrified fingertip that led to the identification of one of the girls. We found a kneecap at one scene that was the piece of the puzzle to identify her, because the kneecap had been fractured,
Right.
and we happened to have medical records with the X-ray, and the fracture line in the kneecap matched the X-ray. I collected one of the biggest pieces of evidence was a stump, a tree stump with a root ball still attached, and there was a struggle at this particular site. This turned out not to be related to Green River, but was another murder case of a young girl
Wow.
just south of here. But we took that because there were some fabric imprints in the mud, and it was the weather conditions were too nasty for us to try to do any casting out there. So we wrapped that thing in a blanket, and I called a backhoe out in a flatbed truck, and we hauled it down to the Seattle King County evidence room and let it dry out. And then we went through the process that we needed to do to process that stump. The property room wasn't happy with me.
I bet. That's fascinating, man. That's incredible that you guys, like I said before, like had the foresight to kind of even think outside the box because you had to. Do you think that like the experiences with like the Ted Bundy case and like kind of the mishaps that happened with that? I mean, back then it was like no one could put, you know, if someone was killed in this county or this town or this other town, cops weren't talking. So the fact that you were talking to other departments and cops and in different areas, do you think that like maybe you kind of, not you particularly, but like the culture changed a little bit of like how to do these kind of things because of big cases like that?
Well, we still had that problem. Um, so there was some evidence that was found in the small police departments around King County that we didn't learn of till later, because that police department wasn't a part of the task force. And again, back then, remember, you didn't have, nobody was communicating by computer.
Right.
There was, the email and texts and cell phones and all that came at a much later time. I think we got our first computer in 1986, and the computer took up the entire size of would take up the entire size of a classroom.
Right.
So yeah, the communication really was by telephone,
Wow.
and by sending out faxes and bulletins. So we communicated as best we could, but there were the really communication systems that we have today, of course, were not in place, and so things did get missed here and there. But I think that as time has gone on, police departments have gotten better at sharing information.
Mm.
Back then, I remember working with some detectives in Portland, and they had come across and I'm just going to call them what they were, a pimp that I had been looking for a while. I knew it. I called them, asked for the information. They wouldn't give it to me. Part of the reason was that they wanted to be the ones to solve the case. And number two is that they didn't, if it was a part of the case, they really didn't want to have Portland associated with the serial murder case, because Portland PD then would be drawn into this political.
Mm-hmm.
We were the media was not kind to us. There were cartoons in the paper that was, called us the Green River Task Farce instead of the Task Force.
Right.
And they really didn't know what was going on. And we couldn't tell them everything that was going on, because you're in an active investigation and there's certain things that you can't share. That's a whole nother story that I could go into about fact. I'll just share one real quick one with you. Early on in the investigation, we had set up a surveillance on Frager Road, which is down in the Kent Valley, which it's only two ways in, and we set up two unmarked cars in the bushes, because we believed through talking to the FBI profilers that the killer would come back to the scene, which we know Ridgway did.
I have a bunch of holsters from Bravo, and one of them is the inside the waistband holster. So this goes inside the waistband if you want to conceal carry. Also, swap it out here, outside the waistband. So this outside the waistband is actually like hella thin, and you can see kind of like how close to the body it can get. You could take this on the range. You can probably conceal this and comfortably do it with, you know, a hoodie over top or whatever. If you want to open carry, it's up to you. They also send out mag pouches, right? So you can throw in an extra mag. You're going to the range. You don't have to unload and reload every single time. You got a little hollow point moment. They come in handy if you're on the range, like I said, or if you're concealed carry and you're one of those people that are gotta have a lot of mags or whatever. You know, whatever your cup of tea is. They also send you these really cool pamphlets. They go into great details in these brochures of how to wear things properly, safety mechanisms, and all the features that all of these holsters have as well. So they really focus on educating their customers, which when it comes to guns, safety and education are number one. They don't have any left-handed holsters except for the Glock 19. I'm a lefty, but the right-handed holsters are so dope and they're so comfortable and concealable that I don't really give a shit. Just learn how to shoot with my right hand. And right now they're doing a buy one, get one free, plus free shipping, the 30-day money-back guarantee, and a lifetime warranty. On top of that, you, my friends, will get 10% off of any product, of any purchase on their website by using Explicit 10. Use the code Explicit 10 and you'll get 10% off your entire purchase from bravoconcealment.com.
After we talked to him, we learned. Right. We had these two cars in the bushes waiting for, the killer to come back. But before we really had set up for more than a couple of days, the news media had made a couple of flyovers the scene just to continue their reporting. They happened to spot these two cars from the air and then put those two cars on their news program as possible detective cars staking out this area. So of course, then after that, we had to forego that idea. We could have caught him early on. Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
So he's not going to come back after the news media.
Of
so
course.
They were a hindrance to us for the most part. But we did use them every now and then to help us get public service announcements out. For example, we used you may have heard in other cases after this, someone out there knows something. Mm-hmm. Kind of see something, say something.
Yeah.
Someone else there knows something. And so I was one of those. Detective Brooks is one of those, and the commander of the task force, Captain Adamson, was the three of us did these public service announcements, and it just generated more tips. We also did a Manhunt live show with Patrick Duffy. It was a 2-hour nationwide show, actually into Canada, and it generated all kinds of. We had a phone bank set up, people calling in. And at the end, the guy calls in and says, "I'm the Green River Killer," because I issued a challenge to the Green River Killer at the end of the program. They had me look right into the camera and say, "We will catch you.
Yeah.
So you should turn yourself in because we are not giving up." It was a little more eloquent speech than that, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Right at the end of the show, the guy calls in and says, "I'm the killer. I want to talk to Reichert." So everybody got excited. The news media had already been let into the room. I get to the phone. This guy's confessing to the crimes on the telephone, and it's got to be the first time in history where a detective is interviewing a possible serial murder suspect by telephone, surrounded by TV cameras and radio microphones shoved in my face for 45 minutes or so. At some point during the conversation, I pretty much realized that this was not the guy. He was full of baloney. Yep. But you can't just disregard that stuff. So.
Right. Yeah. That's another thing is Zodiac. That happened to Zodiac too. Someone called in. They had a broadcast and they interviewed a psychiatrist, and it was like it wasn't the Zodiac killer, but It
Yeah.
was something similar like that. But that's another thing is like you can't leave no stone unturned. And you guys probably got so many crazy tips that you had to kind of see through, which is
Yeah.
distracting you and taking time from other things. But you have to do it, you know?
Yeah. And in fact, I mean, we followed one guy, well, investigated one suspect who was driving through Seattle, picked up a couple of young girls off the street in Seattle, bound and gagged them, put them in the back of the van. They were able to somehow get the back of the van open. And as they drove through Seattle, the suspect drove through Seattle with these two in the back. And now the doors are open. They happen to drive by a Seattle motorcycle officer who saw this, followed him. The guy crashes the car. They chase him. They catch him. The two girls are working girls,
Mhm.
and so I mean, you're thinking we got the guy,
Right. This is
right?
it.
I
Yep.
mean, this is it, right? So, but we spent months on him, and we're able to eliminate him. So there was more than one example like that, but just to give your listeners and viewers, just the idea of that's just one guy
Right.
who was doing something similar to what Ridgway was doing, picking up these prostitutes. People ask me, why was this so hard to solve? Well, um, think of it. You're a John. You're a Trick. You know, what do? You get in a car. And in Ridgway's case, he gets in his pickup truck. He drives up to a sidewalk. He rolls down the window or pops the door open. There's an exchange there that can last a few seconds. The agreement is made. The amount of money and the act is agreed to. The girl gets in the car, disappears into the night.
Yep. That's
And
why
the
it's so
people,
hard.
that's why it's so hard. And the
Yeah.
people on the street who are your possible witnesses are also kind of in this criminal underworld,
Hmm.
and in this, in this prostitution, drugs, and alcohol, and whatever else is happening in that world on the street there. They don't want to talk to the
Mm-mm.
cops. So you have to build trust, and that takes a while. Also, remember that the girls who disappeared, a lot of them are girls that were on the street, I mean, they could have 5, 6 different names,
Hmm.
change their birth dates, 5, 6, 7, 8 different birth dates, change their addresses, change their hair color, change their appearance in different ways, change the license plate numbers on the pimp's cars, change motel rooms. The pimps change their
Jesus
names,
Christ.
change their appearances. One day they're going by Star, the next time they're Golden Girl, or
Hmm.
or whatever. And if you find the body 4 years later, and then you go back, and then that takes you 6 months to identify her. Then you go back. Okay, I've got the name. I know who she is. Now, who are her friends? Now I know who her friends and family are. Now I got to go back and build it. Okay, where were her friends? Where was she? Was she with her friends? And if I figure out that was on a street corner and they last saw her get into a car, is anybody on that street corner with her? Were they high?
Hmm.
Or are they not high? Were they cognizant enough to give me a description of the suspect and the suspect vehicle? In
Right.
most cases, no.
Especially years
So
later.
years later and months later, sometimes one of the young girls who was missing in '82 wasn't found until 6 years later.
Wow. Yeah, and they're not going to remember those types of things, especially like you said, they could be high, they could be intoxicated, they don't want to talk to. It's kind of like those, like I talked to some detectives, the guy who investigated Tupac and Biggie's murder, and it's like that no one's going to talk and tell them, oh yeah, it's just this Crip gang member that shot this person. Like they have to go find that out, like you said, build the
Yeah.
trust. And oh my god, man, that the fact that you're basically telling the scope of what you guys were up against, that I mean, any murder investigation is difficult, let alone one like this on this scope. Also in the river too. I mean, the amount of evidence that was probably lost immediately was, I can imagine, frustrating.
Yeah, I mean, but it's amazing how much. So the Opal Mills and Cynthia Hines, we were able to get spermatozoa. Of course, that was from inside their bodies, and they were only in
Wow.
the river a few days. But Wendy Caulfield was in the river for probably a week or so, if I remember correctly. I'd have to go back and look for sure, but um, just I mean, if she was only in the water a day or two or three, um, you might think that the ligature around her neck would have been totally devoid
Hmm.
of any evidence. Um, that river washed over her, its continual flow, right, of water over that ligature around her neck. Well, later we take that ligature and we're able to find there's a new science too, not only DNA, but a new science in looking at paint evidence. And so on that ligature around Wendy Caulfield's neck, they found the lab did. That's why the scientists in this are so important. The lab found microscopic paint spheres. So Ridgway was a truck
He's a truck
painter
painter. Yeah.
at, at Kenworth Trucking. So he's painting this truck, and the microscopic paint spheres land on his clothing. He transfers those to Wendy Caulfield's ligature. And of course, when we did a search warrant in 1987 of Ridgway, we took his coveralls out of his locker at Kenworth. We had him chew on a gauze and put that saliva sample in a test tube.
Mhm.
And we searched his house and didn't find much else. Those are the two things that we, the coveralls with the paint and the saliva sample. But um, two other pieces of evidence were very key. The one young lady, Debbie Estes, who was found 6 years later, had a piece of article of clothing uh, in the grave with her decomposing for 6 years. That decomposing cloth was examined by the scientists. They found microscopic spheres, paint spheres, on those decomposing threads.
Oh my
And
God.
they were able to match her body to the paint on Ridgway's coveralls. The third piece was a blouse that was found about a mile downriver from the Cynthia Hines, Opal Mills, Marcia Chapman site. And that blouse belonged to Cynthia Hines. And some were questioning, should we take it or not? It's a mile down the river. I said, let's take it, let's keep it. We kept it, we tested it. It had microscopic paint spheres on it. So we made 3 cases on paint evidence, and we made 3 cases on DNA, and one case was associated with the three with DNA because she was found in the same they were found in this Opal Mills was found in the same place, of course, as Cynthia Hines, Marcia Chapman, and then later Carol Christensen was found east of Maple Valley, and she had um, some DNA evidence on her. So we charged Ridgway with seven
Mhm.
with 7 murders.
That you for sure knew he did.
We knew with the
100%.
DNA. The defense attorneys at first said, well, hey, look, before the paint, we only charged him with 4 right at first. And then when I was the sheriff, again, I'll go back to that first. I reopened this case because they shut it down in 1990. The county council didn't want to give the sheriff's office any more money. They didn't think we were going to solve it. Everybody had said it's over. And when I became sheriff, I reopened this case and I said to the detectives, we're going to do an evidence team, and we're going to look at every item of evidence and decide what to do first. I called members of the old task force back together. We met at Precinct 3 in Maple Valley, just south of Seattle, and they all agreed the most important evidence, obviously, to look at would be any evidence where now we could get, because we knew about DNA then in
Can test it now.
1997. So now let's just see what we can find, something that'll give us DNA. And we first took that DNA evidence to a lab on the East Coast in 1999, and they said your evidence is too fragile. It's too minute. And the science hadn't progressed to the point where they could test such fragile samples. So they said, come back when the science has developed further.
Hmm.
And March of 2001, we were contacted by our state lab, and they said, bring us the evidence. We can do this now. So Tom Jensen,
Hmm.
uh, who started on the task force in 1984 and continued working on the case with Jim Doyen after they busted up. In 1990, I was promoted and put back on patrol. Jim Doyne and Tom Jensen went to major crimes, and Tom's job was to continue to manage the case, track and log all of those tips that were still coming in. And he submitted the evidence then, that evidence that was the DNA evidence, in early 2001. I think it was March. And finally in September, we get a response back from the lab. That's how long it used to take back then.
Wow.
In September, Tom and Detective Brooks, who's now a chief, came to my office, and the way that they presented it was, hey, we need to talk to you. Okay. Came down, sat down, and Tom laid out 3 sheets of paper with DNA profiles from 3 victims, and he says these victims, the profiles, we have DNA profiles, and they all match. It's the same person. And I said, Tom, are you trying to tell me we caught the guy? And Tom pulls out an envelope, and he goes to hand it to me and to open. And I said, I don't even need to open that. I know who it is. It's Ridgeway. And I opened the envelope, and it's a mugshot of Ridgeway, the only mugshot we had. And the mugshot was in early 1982, in the first quarter of 1982. I don't recall the month, where Ridgeway was arrested, the one and only time, for patronizing a prostitute, until we identified him and we put him under surveillance. So after this meeting with Faye and Tom, I create this evidence team. I had the meeting with the past detectives, and we put Ridgeway under surveillance. And actually, the evidence team was created prior to this meeting, but we put him under surveillance, and he hit on one of our decoys, our female decoys on the street. And that's when we said, you know what, we need to arrest him, because if he escapes our surveillance and hurts or kills someone, we definitely didn't want that to happen, of course. So we arrested him.
That is great. That's what you said in the doc. That's how it went down in the documentary. See, Tom is the other guy in there, right?
Yeah. Yep. Wow. Tom was our detail guy, and he was sort of our computer before we got computers. He was just one of those kind of guys. He didn't like the scenes at all, but he was our guru there, and we just couldn't have done it without the hard work of Tom, and for that matter, any of the other detectives. They all played a key role. And eventually later, we put a new task force together. Once we arrested Ridgeway, we had another task force together, because our job now was just starting. We arrested him, but now we had to make sure that we could find all the 10,000 items of evidence, because the defense was going to be asking for discovery. We needed to find those. And if you can't find one, they can punch a hole in your case. And we needed to make sure that he was going to be convicted. So we were focused on that. Once we provided we charged him with 4. Well, I'll tell you how the arrest went down real quick.
Yeah.
So, of course, I wanted to be there.
Of course.
But now I'm the sheriff, and this is the 12th largest sheriff's office in the country. So my job's not a detective anymore. I'm in the command post, and I'm listening to the chatter on the radio. We had undercover detectives at Kenworth, in the plant, in the parking lot, all around the parking lot. We had uniformed officers on posts around Kenworth Trucking. When Ridgeway walked out at the end of the day, our detectives rolled up on him in an SUV and said, "Hey, you're Ridgeway, right?" He says, "Yes, I'm Ridgeway. Ridgeway, you're under arrest for the murder of these 4 women." He said, "Okay," and handed him his lunch bucket, and they cuffed him and drove off in the van. What really struck him, he had no emotion, and that's just, that's a typical serial killer profile, the kind of the emotionless, no empathy, no remorse kind of person. And what struck me about that arrest, though, what hit me when I was listening to it, was when the detective came on the radio and said, one in custody, 10-4. So I just thought back to my career on patrol and how many times I had said, one in custody, 10-4.
Mm-hmm.
So one in custody, everything's okay. And here was a 19-year effort, and somewhere between 60 and 70 people killed. We finally arrest this guy, and it was just the anticlimactic one in custody, 10-4. So in a way, it was like every other arrest, but not.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I get it. Yeah. It's kind of
Yeah.
like it's this huge thing, and then it's just like 10-4. All right, we got him. It's
The
it.
language is okay. We got him. So they brought him to the Regional Justice Center. We tried to interview him for a little bit. He was talking a little bit. His attorney showed up, and I sort of waited for a while, let the attorney talk to him, and then I just said, you know what? If that lawyer wants to talk to him any further, he can talk to him in jail. So I had the detectives knock on the door, and the attorney came up, and I said, "Hey, the interview's over. He's going to jail."
Mm-hmm.
He got up, he got cuffed, and he walked past me, and I couldn't resist, but because I had to say something.
Something.
I hadn't had my pound of flesh really
Yeah.
with him, and all I could say as he passed by was, "Gotcha, asshole." And he just kind of stared at me, didn't say a word, and walked past
Jesus.
me. Off to jail he went.
Emotionless like that. That's and you go back to talking about how difficult it was, and you also have to think about the girls and the women in the line of work that they were doing. These are people that are transient, that they don't have a family directly that they could that next of kin that you could notify to an extent, but it's like forgot almost some of these people. So it's kind of hard to find like those. That was his MO, was working girls and
Yeah,
prostitutes, correct?
yeah. He picked that um, profile because they're 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 runaways. Um, they were easy prey. They were vulnerable. Their job was to get in his car. He didn't
Hmm.
have to kidnap anyone. All he had to do was make a deal, and they got in his car. Or and there were some that he took to his home, which was right off the strip. He killed him in his house. That we learned later. But the piece that really is emotional for me is that, and today we've come a long way, I think, in recognizing that in the 70s we treated these girls, and in the 80s, into the 80s really, in early 90s, these little girls were treated as criminals,
Hmm.
and they shouldn't have been. So they were victimized at home, and I would say 95% of them, not all of them were prostitutes. There's some on that victim list that were not. They grew up in good homes. They were in high school. They got into the wrong crowd. They ended up in his grasp, and their life was snuffed out.
Hmm.
But most of them grew up in a home that was dysfunctional. Every family is dysfunctional to some degree, but
Right.
there's violence taking place, either directed at them, directed at another member of the family, sexual abuse. Something at home is causing them to leave, run away, and live on the street. And
Right.
when they get to the street, these pimps back then victimized them again. And today, there's so much human trafficking today, and it's hidden because it's all on. A lot of it's through the internet. A lot of
Hmm.
it's now. You don't see so many on the street working as streetwalkers, as they used to call them, or street hookers, as they used to call them. But these women and young girls now who are in the human trafficking world are working out of homes in neighborhoods like yours and mine,
Hmm.
and nobody knows that, and they're ranging all of that through their internet, through the computer system, through text, through some social medium. So in that day, though, they ended up on the street, and they were scooped up by these pimps and victimized again. So got them on drugs, got them on alcohol, and turned them out on the street. And then they were victimized a third time by the criminal justice system when they were arrested, rather than say, okay, we got to get these girls off the street, get them
Mhm.
some help, and get them back home, get them in school.
Right.
We arrested them for prostitution, we arrested them for drug use, whatever it was. And so, today we really need to focus. Those girls are out there. And you said something about, I think you almost said invisible, but you didn't quite use the word invisible. But that's the other thing that struck me. Back in those days, from Seattle to Tacoma, that's about a 40-minute drive
Hmm.
on Pacific Highway South, maybe a little longer in traffic. But on that Pacific Highway South route, you would see on a Friday and a Saturday night over 100 little girls and young women working on the street corners. And then downtown Seattle, you'd see more women working down in the Pike Street area, down in the farmers market area, and then further north up on Aurora Avenue. So there were hundreds of these girls out every Friday and Saturday night, but all week, day and night, all hours, they'd be out there. People driving to and from, from their homes to work, or from their homes to the store and back from point A to point B, saw these girls but didn't see them.
Hmm.
They were out there, but they were invisible.
Right.
Nobody did anything,
Wow.
and some of them lost their lives. And that's we really need to pay attention to our children these days. Pay attention to family, care for your kids, and care for your sons and your daughters now, because they're all being taken advantage of out there on the streets. Human trafficking is even more prolific today than it was back in the 80s. Harder to identify, harder to investigate, and your child can get sucked into this world through this computer.
Yep. No, you're exactly right. And we'll talk about human trafficking for sure, because that's something I actually had an episode with the Maryland State Police Officer, Joe Dugan, who runs that whole uh, project, really, of capturing these online, mainly online predators and stuff like that, and these sex offenders and child exploitation and trafficking of these children, specifically in the
Yep.
state of Maryland. But it is a huge thing, and I definitely want to talk about it for sure. I'll finish up real quick with uh the I just can you talk a little bit about the toll that
Mm.
this case took on the community, you guys as police officers? Because hearing you talk about and literally listing the names, first and last names of some of these women is like, I mean, that was so long ago, and you remember it like it was yesterday. I could only imagine. So, can you talk about like the toll on the community? I don't know. I'm very curious of that.
Yeah. Um, well, in the beginning, when we started to investigate it, the community was not really paying attention to start out with.
Hmm.
These were little girls who were working in the world of prostitution. It wasn't my little girl.
Right.
But as the case started to build, people and more girls were being killed. People started to worry that, well, this guy might start killing people who are walking home from high school, from junior high school. My daughter could be a victim. The women, there was a group called the Women of the Night, um, Take Back the Night. Initiative was their initiative, Take Back the Night, and they started protesting and raising awareness, which was good. But they blamed the task force for what was going on,
Right.
and helped paint the picture that we were inept and not able to to up
Solve
to
the
the task
case.
of solving the case.
Right.
In fact, they were the push, and the newspapers along with them, to get the FBI involved. The FBI lasted 6 months in the investigation, gave up and quit, and went home. That was in
Jesus.
the mid 80s. So um, the the community, um, started to put a lot of pressure on us to solve this case, and then there was a lot of fear again, as I said, because now
Mhm.
it expanded out to this could be my little girl, not just girls who were involved in the human trafficking world. Um, And then when the case was finally closed, I think there were some who I know the parents of the victims were very um, upset. That's politely put,
Mhm.
um, and angry. And I think a lot of the community was too. And when that happened, I think there were a lot of people who said, well, now this case will never be solved.
Right.
And um, the detectives, I remember the day that I left, there were 3 detectives left, me, Tom Jensen, and Jim Doyen. And Jim Doyen has since passed away. But when I left on that day, um, I knew I was going to patrol, but I was going to be patrolling in the areas where um, the girls were missing from.
Mhm.
I spent my graveyard shifts as a patrol sergeant were spent, of course, doing my job, but I had time to patrol those areas where I had recovered bodies, where I knew victims were missing from. So on patrol, I never forgot this case,
Right.
and I never stopped working on it.
Yeah.
Right? I went back to the same that area, and whether I worked day shift swings or graveyard shifts, I was looking for the killer. And Tom was busy at the computer in the major crimes unit. And if a lead did come up, and people still were calling me at the precinct, hey, I
Oh,
think this
wow.
guy's it. Got that, I think this girl has worked for some. And then I would call Tom, and he'd make a tip sheet. If there was something good, then Jim and Tom would go out and investigate it.
Right.
Uh, but otherwise, they would just enter the information in the machine. Back then, the computer finally. Um, but uh, the case never left. And the if you think about it, you go to bed at night during that entire time, hoping to solve the case, hoping to find something. You didn't want another body to be found.
Hmm.
You were afraid that someone else would be killed. Um, that was your constant concern. But on one hand, you wanted another body found.
Something
Hopefully, it was older, right? It wasn't like overnight,
new. Yeah.
where you could find evidence to catch the guy.
Right.
And then you'd constantly stay up at night thinking, what am I missing? What am I doing wrong? I was totally obsessed with this case
Hmm.
during the time that I was, assigned to the task force, and to the point where they thought about transferring me out because it was unhealthy for
Right.
me.
Yeah.
They thought, but I said, look, I've been to every crime scene. You need me to be here.
Yeah. You know so much about it. You're so valuable.
So they kept me there. But when I went to family events, I was there physically, but mentally, emotionally, I was not. I was sat in a corner and thought about this stuff. I went on vacation for a week. My wife and I went off with some relatives, and I was gone for 3 days. And I worried the entire time that a body was going to be found. On the third day, boom, I find a body. I get a phone call. Um, they said, we'll take care of it. Don't worry. You don't need to fly back. I got on a plane and flew back. I couldn't help myself. I
Wow.
could not stay. Uh, I had to be here.
Wow.
Uh, and I'll tell you, I'm not the only one that felt that way. That's how dedicated and committed. So, pause for a moment.
Hmm.
The cops that are being bashed today, it makes me sick to my stomach because I know 99.9% of those men and women who are out there care.
Right.
They want to help. They want to make a difference. They want to save lives. They want to counsel people. They want to protect people. They want to hug people. They want to give them groceries. We did that on the task force. You go to a house, tell them that their daughter's died, and you see their cupboards are bare. What did we do? We went to a grocery store, we bought bags of groceries, left it on the front porch.
Wow.
You go to went to one house, little boy's bicycle was stolen right before Christmas. And so I went home, and myself and a couple other detectives, we bought new wheels for this little bike, painted it, decaled it up, put new handlebars, new wheels on it, drove it over there on graveyard shift, dropped the bicycle off on the front porch and left. The family doesn't know who put it there,
Wow.
but we do.
Wow.
That's the thing that cops do, though. And people need to wake up and realize that I'm not the only one that's served in that way. And like I say, I really believe everybody that I worked with served in that way. They served with the heart of a servant. That's what I like to call it. They know that they're serving and they have the heart of a servant. That's a gift. Not
Right.
everybody will raise their hand and say, put me in that uniform. Let somebody slash my throat with a butcher knife and end up with 45 stitches and nearly die. Um, Not everybody says, yeah, put me in there and let somebody point a gun at me or shoot at me,
Right.
or beat the shit out of me, which has happened. Um, so you can see this, it touches a very sensitive spot for me, because the way that cops are being treated today is absolutely unbelievable and so ridiculous. And look at the rise in crime right now,
I
and
know.
that just tells you, right? So yeah, I was wrapped up in this case. I was obsessed with this case. My wife, put up with that sort of a personality for many, many years until
Yeah.
when this case was solved, that burden was lifted. And when I gave that press conference on the day that we arrested Ridgway, um, people stopped in their tracks. I still get people today that say, I remember you on TV that day making that press announcement about you arrested the Green River Killer, when actually I said we arrested Ridgway, but everybody knew what I was saying.
Right.
That eventually, he became the Green River Killer because we caught him. He pled to 49. We closed 51 cases.
Wow.
He killed somewhere between 60 and 70 women.
Yep.
But it was like, for this community, it was like a heavy, heavy, dark cloud and burden that had been hanging over the Northwest for many, many, many years. And when that announcement was made, I have people telling me they actually hugged their mother or hugged their spouse. They were jumping up and down.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, yes, it took 19 years, but it's like that's the fact that I don't know, man. That's just damn. It takes me. There's a detective from BTK said that um they didn't realize they had a serial killer, and then Wichita, where that happened, Wichita woke up, right? And King County is obviously not Wichita; it's much bigger. But it's incredible to hear that like the community is like had such a in the beginning, kind of like they were annoyed and they were pissed off because it wasn't getting solved. We already talked about how difficult it was to solve. I mean, it took so long for a reason. And the fact that like everyone was kind of like they could breathe a sigh of relief almost of like, okay, this guy is off the streets. And it's kind of interesting that it's full circle that you were the one that came back, reopened the case, and eventually was able to solve the crime. And I also want to talk about the cop thing too, because I 100% agree with you with that, with that stuff. But damn, man, that gives me chills. The whole time you were talking, I had chills about everything you said. I'm sorry, I cussed a little bit. That
Yeah,
is
no,
it's crazy. It's
it's
heavy.
I always believe that God has a plan. And
Jesus.
that entire time I was praying, "Well, why can't we solve this?" Um,
Mm.
but I don't really know. Uh, you, you, I went to homicide and robbery at I was
Wow.
28 years old, soon to be 29, and then 3 years later, I find myself just walking by the desk, and the sergeant had taken a phone call from the comm center saying they found this body in the Green River. And so off I went, and little did I know that I was going to be
Whoa.
the face for Green River. And then the case is closed. And then um, I came back. I was promoted rather quickly after that, from sergeant to lieutenant to captain to precinct commander. So from 1990 March, when they closed the case, I became the sheriff in 97, March of 97. So that's when I reopened the case. And I'll tell you, when I was a captain, I applied for a job as the police chief of one of our largest contract cities, Shoreline. There were 5 candidates. So we all interviewed with the new city council, and I got a phone call a week later, and the person said, you interviewed well. We really liked you. However, we picked somebody that kind of fits more with our city. So I think that was one of my first disappointing rejections in
Right.
there were a lot of tough times, don't get me wrong, but that one kind of hit me hard because I thought I was, a shoe in and felt
Mhm.
pretty confident, but I was told I wasn't the guy. But just a few months later, maybe 10 months went by, and there's an opening for a precinct commander. So I applied for that. 4 other people applied. We all interviewed, and I was selected to be the precinct commander for the North Precinct. And so I was promoted to that um, position in early of March of '96. And the person who got the captain's job that I wanted was now working for me.
Oh, wow. How'd that work out? Yeah.
So 10 months later, the in 1996, the voters decided they want to have an elected sheriff. So for the first time in 30 years, they want to go back to an elected sheriff rather than appointed.
Mhm.
Our appointed sheriff says, I don't want to run for election. So I'm out of here. He left and took another police chief's job. So now they're looking for a sheriff. And I'm been a precinct commander for maybe 10 months. And I get a phone call from one of our chiefs who says, hey, we hear that the county executive wants to appoint somebody, and we want to run your name up the flagpole. And I said, he goes, for sheriff. And I said, you got to be, I thought it was a joke.
Right.
And so I started laughing. And it was Chief Larry Mays that had called me. And so if he watches your podcast, he's out there today. So this is all his mastermind. But he calls the executive, tells the executive about me. I get a phone call. The executive would like to interview me on Monday morning. So this was on a Friday. I got threatened on Saturday by one of the people who were going to. He was a state representative. He called and said, "If you run, I'm going to bury you. I
Oh my
have the money.
God.
I have the fame, and I'm going to rip your career apart, and I'll bury you in the campaign." And so, if I had any sort of indecision in my mind as to whether or not I was going to run, that guy just solidified in my mind that
Right.
I was gonna go for this job.
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep.
on Monday, I went in and I interviewed with the county executive and a couple of his staff. On Tuesday, I got a phone call from somebody in the sheriff's office who's from Sufoy, who
Mhm.
was the sheriff's executive assistant, who later turns out to be my executive assistant. He calls and says the executive wants to meet you uh, tonight, Tuesday night, for dinner. So I
Wow.
said, okay. I was at work, so I met the executive. I sit down. He says, I'd like to offer you the job of sheriff. I said, okay. And on Wednesday morning, I raised my right hand and I was the sheriff of King County. And
What?
then, yeah, and that's how it happened. And then I forget how long it took me. It might have only been a few weeks, but I reopened the case and started the evidence team and called the past detectives together.
Wow.
And so we began that effort right away. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think back to my career. Um, I could have easily died when the guy slit my throat because he just missed my jugular vein.
Right.
There were times where I mean, one case I had a shotgun stuck in my belly, and and it was a standoff between me and this other guy, and I talked him out of shooting me, and he jacked his 3 rounds out of his shotgun and laid it on the bed. Um, I could have easily, I lost my best friend. He was shot and killed in 1982, just before the Green River case started.
Wow.
I lost another good friend, an academy mate in 1984, who was stabbed with a World War II sword. He was stabbed and killed uh, on duty. Uh,
You could have got that
the
job.
I've been very blessed,
Yeah.
and to be in this position. And then after 8 years of being the sheriff, 33 years with the sheriff's office, and um, I went to Congress for 14 years, and I worked on the foster care system, which ties closely in with kids who are in trouble, who are leaving their homes, who need a loving, caring home to keep them off the street. Did a lot of work with domestic violence and did a lot of work with and in human trafficking during my years in Congress.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's segue into that if you want, the human trafficking thing, because it's like you said earlier, it's an important thing. It's happening more now than ever. When I talked to that guy I mentioned, Joe Dugan, I was like, how many? It can't be, with To Catch a Predator when that came out, like now that it's more in the spotlight, it can't be happening more. He's like, no, it actually almost doubles every year, the amount of people that are being affected by this and being trafficked and taken and assaulted and stuff like that, and just exploited, really. Um, and I'll tell you one quick little story. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I lived kind of close near Route 85. And I lived up from DC. I lived in New York. I never really noticed any kind of trafficking signs ever. Um, and let me tell you, when I was there, I saw so many signs of trafficking that it was like almost plain as day. I mean, people, but almost getting like abducted into a van. It was like everywhere in the news. Every night, it was like, oh, this kid or this young person was abducted, and it's like so close to the highway where it's like, bam, I could pick them up and I'm gone. And then they're out of Charlotte, or they're out of that area. They're down, they go south, or they go north. Because 95 was like right there. But I never thought of it like that until I like literally saw it, and I was like kind of in it with the community, where it was a huge deal in that in Charlotte when I lived there. But I just never thought of it like that. I thought of it like, like the movie Taken. That's what I think of human trafficking, of like overseas. It doesn't happen here, right? But I was completely wrong. So if you want to kind of touch on the
Yeah, I
trafficking.
mean it's always been here. There are always those people that want to take advantage
Mm-hmm.
of the weaker people in our society, and those that are out there who are young and have left home, or who are in areas where they shouldn't be and are vulnerable, are people who are open to be victimized. And the thing that exacerbates it more today is, not to be political about this, this is a fact. The open borders in our southern border is has really increased the human trafficking flow, and and the cartels are involved in that. And the cartels don't just exist in Central and South America. They exist here in the United States and in other countries, and they're working together in concert with each other. I know of cases where, because I did work in the Central America for 2.5 years after Congress on human trafficking, and some parents are hurting for money so bad down there that they would rent their children to people to bring them up to the United States to use as their own child to get them across the border,
Wow.
and then the child is taken back again and used again. Sometimes the children are kidnapped and brought up here, and eventually they're put into human trafficking, or they're killed on the way. They're used and abused, sexually abused, raped, all the way up from Guatemala to Texas, and their throats are slits, and they're left in the desert to die.
Jesus
Um,
Christ.
I know, some are kidnapped.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to an 11-year-old girl in Guatemala who was nursing her um, um, little baby, 11-year-old little girl who was raped and has her own baby. I mean, how it's just tragic, what's happening. And then the second thing that's having a huge impact on human trafficking today goes back to what we were talking about before, and that is just the entire attitude toward crime and law enforcement. So if there is this crime that people call, victimless crime, like drug use or um, which there is no such thing, right? If
Right.
you're using drugs, somewhere along the line, there's going to be a victim.
Hmm.
Maybe it's just you are the victim because now you're addicted to drugs and you're killing yourself.
Right.
Um, and others around you are affected. Your entire family is affected. Maybe you draw a brother or a sister into that world.
Hmm.
They overdose and die. So there is no such thing in my mind as a victimless crime. Prostitution is another example that people want to paint as, well, it's their choice. Well, no, a lot of time it's not their choice.
Right.
So the attitude toward crime has to change, and the attitude toward how we solve this problem of human trafficking has to change. It's not all about the criminal justice system. It definitely is when it comes to the Johns and the tricks that are using and abusing and raping teenagers
Right.
and young women in the human trafficking world. But the victims, the young girls and young boys in today's world too, are being used and abused and killed,
Hmm.
assaulted, raped, and killed. And those kids are the ones we need to start to pay attention to and look at how we can help those families that are struggling to raise their children. Um, it used to be when you had a family that was abusing their children at home, the police could go in and take that abused child, put them in to foster care, and foster care them, and finally have them adopted into a loving, caring family. And then so number one, I think it's not in any particular order, but in my mind, I have to list these out. That whole open borders thing has just increased the problem exponentially. And then secondly, the way that we view crime today and define crime is second. And then third, it's the way that we view cops and law enforcement, and the way that we tie their hands and prevent them from enforcing
Right.
the law. So I think to get all that together, and finally, the last point I would make on this, and probably the most critical, should be number one, is again the focus on the family,
Right.
the loving, caring family, so that young people don't get engaged in drugs and alcohol and prostitution and that family working with the school district, that family working with social agencies, that family working with the police and supporting teachers and doing the job of raising law-abiding, healthy um, men and women. Because I traveled a lot around the world, as I mentioned before, and every place that I've gone, the parents all want the same thing for their child.
Hmm.
They want a safe home, safe, loving home. They want to provide their kids with food, education, and a future,
Right.
right? And I also think that faith plays an important role in all of this. No matter what your faith is out there, I'm not trying to
Push it down.
define your faith for you. My faith happens to be, I happen to be a Christian. And so I believe that Jesus Christ died for my sins, and I have and know my sins because we all sin. I know I'm forgiven, and I know where I'm going once this life here ends.
Right.
And I think that has, that heart of a servant piece. It fits a lot of different religions,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
right? So people should grab onto that. I'm here to serve, respect, and treat people with respect. Um, and fairness and equality. That's my job.
Right. Yeah. And honestly, like when it comes to the cop thing, I feel like now more than ever, it's easy to kind of, blame an entire community of people, cops, for a couple other people's actions, right? And American people in general tend to do that with a lot of people, where like you might see
Yeah,
a certain type of demographic of a person or a type of, you know, I don't know, educated person or not educated person. You put that one person in a clump of everyone else, and I agree with you. It's very frustrating because a lot of people don't understand how. I don't even know how difficult it is to be a cop. I mean, one day you got to be a psychiatrist. The next day you have to de-escalate a situation. The next day you have to be able to take out a guy with a knife trying to cut your throat. The next day there's so many things that they have to do on a daily basis. And I personally agree. I don't think they get enough credit. And I think that they are looked at in the wrong light, especially now since everyone's got a cell phone. And, you always catch the tail end of something. You don't really
Yeah.
get the whole story. And then you're prosecuted by social media and cancel culture right away. Yes, there are a couple bad apples out there, but that's with anything.
Yeah.
For the most part, they all are trying to protect and to serve. They took that oath for a reason. It's very serious to them, and you're a prime example of that, and everything that you've gone through and your dedication to those families. I remember we talked on the phone. I remember back in the day, even in my back in the day, it's you do a ride along with a cop. It was cool. You respected the cop. They're part of the community. It wasn't like this, like, oh, fuck the police type situation.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think that it needs to get back to that in some way, shape, or form. I know that's easier said than done for sure.
Yeah.
But
I think the pendulum is going to swing. People, like I say, want safe communities. They want their
right.
kids safe. We're seeing some activity in California now where they're starting to recognize that maybe defunding the police was a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that there aren't bad cops too,
Right.
for your listeners out there. I've testified against bad cops in court, and when I was a police officer. We good cops don't want to work with bad cops.
Right.
We want out, but you hire um, cops from the human race,
Mm-hmm.
and you can have all the filters in place and the processes in place where you want to hire the top quality candidate, the most qualified person that you can find to be a police officer in your community. But there's going to be a few that will fall through the cracks that shouldn't have been hired.
Right.
And you can find that, like as you said, in the teacher's profession and the doctor's profession,
Any of them.
working at Boeing, at Walmart, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yeah.
There's
Seriously. Yeah.
bad people everywhere,
Yep.
and I just think that if people worked with the police to hire the right people, get the community involved with hiring the right people, training the cops,
Training.
get the community involved with training and setting curriculum so that the community takes ownership now in their law enforcement agency. Hey, I was on the board. I helped hire this guy or gal, right? I
Right.
was on the training commission. I helped set the curriculum for our community to train these police officers. And now that we've hired the right people, now that we've trained the right people, we
Mm-hmm.
need to support the right people. These people that we hired to do the job that we hired them to do. And yes, it's to enforce the law, but as you said, they just do so much more than that.
So much. So
And
much.
it's the last thing I'll say is that on this topic is
Mm-hmm.
that um, we need to elect people to our city councils and county councils and state legislative bodies to support law enforcement, because if you don't support law enforcement, you're going to have chaos, you'll have vigilantes, you'll have more guns,
Right.
and more people using guns to protect their own property and their own families. And what you want are people in those elected positions that will say, you know what, we're going to hold the police departments and sheriff's office accountable.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to provide them with the tools that they need, the money they need to train their cops, the money they need to buy new technology. For example, there's a new machine called Rapid DNA. It's about the size of a microwave. It costs about 150 grand. I don't, somewhere in there. Now today, if in the old days, my day, I would go to a murder scene and I would start to develop a list of suspects: the husband, the brother, the uncle, the neighbor,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, the cousin. And I'd start to investigate and build a probable cause case on a couple of those people. And if I got probable cause on a couple, that gives me enough to do a search warrant, gives me enough to arrest them.
Right.
And but if I do that to two people, one of those or both could be innocent.
Right.
So I've just searched an innocent person's home, and I've also taken away their freedom by putting the cuffs on them and taking them to jail, and they haven't done a damn thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in today's world, I could go to a homicide scene, and if I say, and this isn't going to happen in every case, but if I see some bodily fluid in this crime scene, and I go, you know what, that's the suspects.
Right.
Take a swab, put it in this machine. 90 minutes later, I'll get a DNA profile. That gives me my suspect right there.
Right. Yep.
Now that doesn't mean he's the guy, but he's the main suspect. I got a DNA, I got blood. Let's say it's blood. I swab it. I get his profile. I got the name. Now I build my case. I get fingerprints. I get witness statements. I get time logs of when he was at work and when he was, when
Wow.
he was available to be. So I get all of that stuff. And then when I finally go to meet him, I get a search warrant to take another DNA swab from him. And I put that in the machine. And in 90 minutes, I'll know if that matches. That's the guy that matches the blood on the swab.
God, that saves so much
So,
time.
and the other thing it saves is that conflict that might occur between the cop and the innocent person at
Right.
that search. Because if you come into my house and you're telling me I just committed a crime and I know I didn't, I'm going to be pissed.
Yeah, there's gonna be a problem.
And then imagine if you're a person of color, that just feeds the narrative of, well, yep, cops are
Profiling.
racist.
Yep. Yep.
I'm a person of color, and the cops are taking me to jail because later then you find out that it was a white guy
Yeah,
that
that
he killed.
happens a lot. I see that a lot of exonerated people that
Yeah.
just, and it's funny, well, not funny, but yeah, I don't know if you know the Navy SEAL Jocko Willnick, I think his last name is.
Hmm.
Anyway, he goes on Joe Rogan a lot, but when they were talking about defunding the police, he brought up a good point. And he said, if you do defund, he's like, you should actually do the opposite. You should give more funding for more training, to find those, like, you're exactly what you're saying, the high level people, the high quality candidates. Because if you give the cops a bad name and they have a bad rap, no one wants to be a cop. Who the hell do you think are going to become the cops?
Right, right. Well, it's the same with politicians today too. If you just want to rant and rave about a certain politician, you know what? The good people aren't going to run anymore.
That's
If you want,
exactly
if you
right.
want to attack the crap out of them, it's the politics is a nasty game. Like I say, I ran 7 times in a Democrat state as one of the few Republicans that was able to win here in Washington State,
Wow.
and I got hammered every day. I got hammered every day, but I stayed because I wanted to make a difference and I wanted to help. Finally, I mean, I had made a promise to myself I wasn't going to be there when I was 70 years old, so I left at I think it was 68.
That's amazing.
So yeah, but
Well,
I spent 14 years there.
that's what I was
So
going to ask is, what do I know you got a prior engagement too after this, but
yep.
um, actually one last question, and it kind of can tie into your politics, is like, what do you want to accomplish at the end of the day, if you haven't already?
But for me, it's for every day. What I want to do, I just want to make a difference, in somebody's life and just be a positive influence. And um, I did that Netflix documentary that you were talking about. Episode 1
Mm-hmm.
is the one that Detective Brooks and Detective Jensen and I were on. I got an email from a cop in Hungary who
Wow.
saw that episode, and she said some nice things about us and me and how we worked the case and cared about the people and compassionate, etc. But what struck me was the final note was a question at the end of the email. Can you please answer me, respond to me? I'm using a translator to send you this. No, I don't speak English. I'm using a translator,
Right.
but I would like to know uh, what advice could you give me to be the best police officer I could be in the community I serve in my country?
Wow.
Now, so then people go, well, what advice would you? Because there's all kinds of,
There's not just
you
one.
keep your training up, train with your firearm,
Right. Right.
take vacation when you need it, that kind of thing. But I'll tell you the most important thing, and I would tell any cop this, um, is to remember that you're, again, I said this already in this interview, that you are a servant. You're there to serve the people. Now, it doesn't mean you're a social worker. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that you have to stop enforcing the law, but you understand that you serve the people with the heart of a servant. I'm here to help you. And the heart of a servant to me means that I get up every morning and I think about what does the other person need or want? Put their needs before my needs. And that's what cops do. They put their life
Mm-hmm.
before, they put their life out there for
Yeah,
you.
for sure. Yeah.
Um, I'll just give you another real quick example. I was the sergeant of a plainclothes team um, out in the White Center Burien area just south of Seattle. It's a tough neighborhood, and we were serving a drug search warrant. So we all had assignments. We announced ourselves. We kicked in the door. Mine was to go into the bathroom, which was off to the right. We had the floor plan. The other officers went through the rest of the apartment. I got to the bathroom. I opened the door. There's an addict sitting on the toilet. He's got the band around his arm. He's got the needle shoved up his vein, and he's got the glazed eyes, and I'm yelling at him to get down on his knees, put his hands behind his head, and he's just staring at me. And finally, he stands up and he puts his hands up above his head. Now he's not doing what I asked him to do. He just got his hands up, and all of a sudden, his hand disappears behind a half wall. Now, is that when you shoot the guy?
Right.
You know,
Like, what
but
do
he
you do?
comes out. What do you do? And I'm just asking your viewers that. What do you do? And so you have to make that split-second decision. Get down on your knees, put your hands behind your head, and he stands up, puts his hand, and he's got the needle in his arm. His eyes are glazed over. I don't know what this guy's gonna do.
Mhm.
And he does come out with a gun in his hand. Now, as soon as I see that gun come out, is that when you shoot him? A
Right.
lot of cops would. A lot of cops would, and they'd be justified in doing that.
Mhm.
But I always look for the person who gives it that one split second longer. And I said, drop the gun, drop the gun, drop the gun. And I've got my gun on him. And he looks at me, kind of gives me a little bit of smile, kind of swerves around a little bit, and leans back, and he drops the gun in the toilet.
Wow.
And then I jumped him, cuffed him, and off he went to jail. But you know, I hope your listeners put themselves in that position. I know it's hard, it's a hard thing to do, but when do you pull that trigger? And if I had pulled the trigger when his hand went behind the wall and all that was back there was a hairbrush,
Right.
or he came out with a hairbrush and I shot him because I thought it was a gun, I'd be out of a job. I'd be
Right.
going to jail
Right.
in
Right.
today's world.
Yeah. It's in a lot of situations, it's a lose-lose for the cops because
Yeah,
God forbid he did have the gun and he pointed at you and shot you, but you waited too long. There's
yeah,
I feel like there's never really a right time or answer,
right.
with any of those things, which is
Well,
fucking
and that's the thing. So now you have guys, cops out there who won't take any action because they don't want to be in that situation
mhm,
where and now I'm going to put myself. I am going to die,
mhm,
right?
right.
If they want me to take it to this nth degree, um, then I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I have to make that decision because you actually want me to get shot first before I take action,
Exactly.
and
Right.
I'm not doing that,
No,
and I
somebody
wouldn't
signed
either.
up for. No.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I mean, I signed up to take risks and knew that my life would be in danger, but I'm not there to put myself be
Yeah,
stupid.
not blatantly do
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
right.
Exactly. No, I totally hear that. That's great advice, I think, to anybody listening that is in law enforcement, and not even just to have a different perspective of someone who has walked in those shoes for decades, has seen everything, like we've talked about in this whole interview. I mean, Dave, you're a great guy. Like I'm in
Yeah,
awe of you, actually. I didn't think this was going to go is the way it did. Honestly, I thought we were going to talk about the Green River Killer and this and that, but man, you really make some really good points, and I hope a lot of people can think about all the stuff that you've been saying, because I think now is a good a time as any to kind of really understand what goes through, all the stuff that the cops do and stuff like that. So thank you so much,
Well,
man.
hey man, thank you for having me on. And I say to your listeners out there, the time is now for us to start to change things and turn things around and be positive and respect each other. Let's work together and do that. And it's easy to find the bad in people.
Right.
It's a lot harder to find the good. Let's find the good and focus on that. God bless you guys.
Thank you,
Thanks.
man. That's another episode for the E4 Explicit podcast. We'll see you next time. And right now they're doing a buy one, get one free plus free shipping, the 30-day money back guarantee, and a lifetime warranty. On top of that, you, my friends, will get 10% off of any product, of any purchase on their website by using Explicit 10. Use the code Explicit 10 and you'll get 10% off your entire purchase from bravoconcealment.com.